Hey, welcome along to Farage. The Queen is not going to be spending Christmas at Sandringham. How about the rest of us? Has that star over Bethlehem been taken down on orders from Sage, or is it still up there in the sky? Let's get the latest from GBNews political editor Darren McCaffrey.
Yeah, very good evening, Mark. No restrictions in England for the time being. That was the word from the Prime Minister today after a very long cabinet meeting. In fact, we don't really see cabinet meetings lasting more than an hour. This went on for nearly 2.5 hours, and there clearly are disagreements within cabinet about whether there should be further restrictions in England, either before or after Christmas. In fact, the decision seems to be being postponed because the cabinet cannot agree on what direction to take. We know that people like Michael Gove and Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, are quite keen to implement some restrictions to try and slow down the spread of Omicron here in the UK. But at the same time, many others concerned about those restrictions, the impact it could have on businesses, on the economy, but also, frankly, on people's Christmases. The bigger question is, could Boris Johnson get away with imposing restrictions, cancelling Christmas again, effectively, given his fall in support, not just amongst the wider public, particularly within the Conservative Party? And that's where there are, I think, concerns amongst his critics, Mark, but that potentially he's making these decisions not necessarily in the public health interest, but rather in party management interests, because given how large the rebellion was last week about imposing Plan B in England, you can well imagine that if he wanted to go further, that rebellion could be even bigger.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me, Darren. I mean, is there a political reality in that, regardless of what the scientists say, the majority of cabinet would not now back Boris Johnson if he were to cancel Christmas? In other words, there's no majority for cancelling Christmas among a cabinet that is beginning to get the jitters after North Shropshire and Lord Frost and all the rest of it.
Yeah, indeed, and Lord Frost is a perfect example of that. There are many who agree with him. He does not think that there is a need for further restrictions. Now, the government's main message in all of this, or the Prime Minister's message, is we need to wait, essentially, for the data. Now, that is a decision in itself, and it may well turn out to be proportionate. I mean, not all the evidence, the real-world evidence, is necessarily bad at the moment. We look at South Africa, which is clearly where Omicron was first discovered, and we have not seen a rise in hospitalisations like we've seen in previous waves, certainly not deaths. There does seem to be this decoupling from an enormous jump in cases, but nowhere near the same reflection in hospitalisations. There are even suggestions that the virus, or that variant there, may well have peaked. We know that hospitalisations are up in London here in the UK, which has been the epicentre of the recent spread, but that's not true elsewhere in England. So, the evidence today is not that conclusive, not least of all on whether this potentially is. Right. We certainly know it's more transmissible. We don't know whether it's less severe or not, but it seems to be pointing to the fact it could be less severe. In the end, though, listening to the Prime Minister today, and you're entirely right in saying that one of the reasons he cannot move at the moment is because he's politically boxed in. But the tone, at least, from Boris Johnson was very much a sense of when restrictions might come into play, not if. And that is why there are lots of suggestions that even though we might have a clear run at Christmas in England, that in the end, those restrictions could come into place just a couple of days afterwards.
Yes, that seems to be the way it's looking, Darren. Make the most of Boxing Day, because Monday is going to be the day you're boxed in. Thank you for that, Darren.